Hey everyone, Two Angry Frogs here, and it's time to refresh our Ranged DPS Tier List. We've seen some shakeup from patch 11.0.5, with Fire Mage making the top 3 in single target, Frost Mage falling off of a cliff, and Devastation Evoker climbing the charts. As compared to patch 11.05, which was dominated by melee specs, when we put our tier list together, in patch 11.1 we have a much better mix with ranged and melee fairly evened out. So let's jump in and give our take on where things have landed. So when it comes to tier lists, there are many ways to approach them. We base ours on a number of factors, including ease of play, solo and group content, viability, single target and AoE DPS, and general utility of the spec. If we simply based it on DPS, we could just run some sims and generate a quick list. But for many of us, a majority of our gameplay time is spent in solo play, and Delves has increased that even more so. For this reason, we put emphasis on how classes and specs are suited for solo play, in addition to taking into account Mythic Plus and rating. So with all that out of the way, let's jump in. Starting with Balance Druid, it's had minimal change in patch 11.1. Most of this has come in the class tree in the form of utility, and flexibility in talent selections. For hero talents, it is a mix with Keeper of the Grove, recommended for single target, and Alloons chosen for Mythic Plus AoE content. For solo play, either set of hero talents is viable, and the rotations apart from Alloons chosen Mythic Plus AoE follow a fairly standard pattern. Balanced Druid is one of the specs that is relatively easy to pick up, and has a moderate skill ceiling, and is great for open world and solo play. For heroic difficulty raid and single target DPS, it currently sits near the bottom, only outperforming Frost Mage. But for Mythic Plus AoE in patch 11.1, Balanced Druid is a powerhouse, even at lower gear item levels. Regardless of the numbers, however, Balanced Druid is a very popular choice in group content. For utility, Druids continue to shine, with Mark of the Wild, Stampeding Roar, a battle res, self-healing, good defensive utility, and a slew of other stuns and interrupts. Balance is a great spec for survivability and overall utility. So for Balanced Druid in patch 11.1, we're putting it in A tier. For Beastmastery, patch 11.1 brings a rework to the spec talent tree and a new concept for pack leader hero talents. Pack Leader now summons 3 beasts, a bear, boar, and wyvern, each with their own unique abilities. Dark Ranger, although buffed recently, still lags Pack Leader by wide margins, so Pack Leader continues to be the recommended hero spec for all content types. Even with the rework, Beast Mastery sits pretty much as a mid-level spec. For heroic difficulty raid and single target DPS, Beast Mastery sits square in the middle, and for Mythic Plus AoE, it's pretty much the same. However, Beastmastery is still very popular behind only Ret Paladin as the choice for players in group content. Rotationally, it's still one of the easiest specs to play, and given our instant cast abilities, unrestricted mobility, and pets, it's still great for solo play. When it comes to group utility, we still fall behind most other classes, with only Hunter's Mark in raid and single target encounters. In dungeons and solo play, it is better with stuns, traps, interrupts, and stealth, among other utility. Beastmastery is in a better position than it was in patch 11.05, but remains a B tier spec. For patch 11.1, the Marksmanship Hunter spec talent tree went through a redesign of its own. It leans heavily into the concept of the lone wolf now, and a spotting eagle has replaced the need for pets, bringing all of the same utility. Patch 11.1 brings minor updates to both Sentinel and Dark Ranger hero talents, and a split in content recommendation, with Dark Ranger recommended for single target and Sentinel for Mythic Plus AoE. For heroic difficulty raid and single target DPS, Marksmanship sits with the top specs and is number 1 in pure single target. For Mythic Plus AoE, throughput is also near the top. So for all group content, Marksmanship is a solid choice, even though it consistently lags behind Beastmastery in popularity. In solo play, we still have the option of bringing out a pet for tanking, and Marksmanship like Beastmastery has excellent mobility. Marksmanship suffers from the same raid utility issues as Beastmastery, but brings useful utility in dungeon and solo play. The raw DPS output of Marksmanship in patch 11.1 is more than enough to overcome any lack of utility, so we're placing it solidly in A tier. There's not a lot of change for Arcane Mage coming into patch 11.1, the primary being the removal of Ether Vision and it being replaced with Intuition. This, in addition to Arcane Barrage buffs, makes Arcane Barrage much better on its own now. Sun Fury and Spellslinger hero talents have remained relatively consistent, with only minor changes to Burden of Power. For hero talents, currently Spellslinger is outperforming Sun Fury and is recommended for all content types. As far as Arcane's standings, they have taken a downturn from patch 11.05. For heroic difficulty raid and single target, Arcane is in the lower half of Ranged DPS, and in Mythic plus AoE, it sits in the lower half as well. As it pertains to solo play, Arcane has a good amount of mobility, but can be a difficult spec to master. As with mages in general, Arcane has decent defensive ability, but can become overwhelmed due to being a bit squishy when defensives are on cooldown. Utility-wise, mages are still in a great spot, bringing sought-after group content buffs in Arcane Intellect and Time Warp. Mass Barriers, Curse Removal, Slows, and Stuns are also great for Dungeon and Delve content. For Arcane Mage in 11.1, we rank it as B tier. For Fire Mage, what a difference a patch cycle makes. In patch 11.1, Fire Mage has made huge gains and sits in the top 3 among ranged DPS for heroic difficulty raid and single target. For Mythic plus AoE, it sits in the upper half of specs and is the 3rd most popular ranged DPS behind Balanced Druid and Beastmastery Hunter. Coming into patch 11.1, Fire has seen buffs to several core abilities, including Pyroblast and Flame Strike, and the Season 2 tier set leads to more combustion uptime and increased damage during combustion. This all leads to more burst windows with higher damage, which is what Fire thrives on. Another change in patch 11.1 is a move away from Frost Fire hero talents into Sun Fury. Unleashed Inferno, which is based on combustion being active, further plays into the fire ability buffs and tier set. Frostfire can be viable for Mythic plus AoE, but it is much more difficult to play and still lags behind Sun Fury when it comes to single target, so right now it's all about Sun Fury. For solo play and delves, Fire Mage is an excellent choice due to the sheer damage output. Fire has always been a more difficult to master spec, but once you have the rotations down and understand how to make good use of their utility, Fire can burn through high-level delves. Pun intended. So for patch 11.1, we rank Fire Mage as A tier. Frost Mage in patch 11.1 brings some rework of both hero talent trees and changes to Ice Lances, Freezing Winds, and Blizzard. Due to this, for the first time in a long time, the Shatter combo has some changes, making it much more interactive, and with it brings some additional complexity to the rotation. For hero talents, Frostfire continues into patch 11.1 as the recommended selection for all content types. Given the additional complexity baked into Frost Mage, we would typically expect that to be rewarded with better than average DPS. But that is not the case. For heroic difficulty raid and single target DPS, Frost Mage sits at the very bottom of all ranged DPS, and for Mythic plus AoE, it sits in the bottom 3rd. But despite this, Frost is still a relatively popular spec. For solo play and solo delves, the lack of DPS can make it a little less optimal. Utility-wise, as with other mages, it's still in a great spot, bringing sought-after group content buffs, and survivability can be really good. But for Frost Mage in 11.1, we're going to rank it as C tier. For Shadow Priest, there is not much to report. There has been minimal change since patch 11.05 outside of a few minor changes to the Void Weaver hero talents and buffs to a handful of abilities. For hero talents, both Archon and Void Weaver are viable in all types of content, so the updates to Void Reaver have at least opened up player options. Shadow Priest's position essentially depends on the changes and movement of other specs. This has not made a significant impact on single target, but has decimated Shadow Priest in Mythic Plus AoE. In Heroic Difficulty Raid and single target, Shadow Priest sits in the top half of ranged DPS, but for Mythic Plus AoE, it is at the very bottom. Given the lack of change, there is little to no change in the rotations and how Shadow Priest plays. As with prior iterations, once you learn the single target rotation, the AoE rotation is not significantly different. From a group play perspective, Shadow Priest brings invaluable utility in Power Word Fortitude, Mass Dispel, and Power Infusion, but it's not enough to make up for the lack of DPS in dungeon and AoE content. So for now, we're putting Shadow Priest in C tier. For Elemental Shaman, it's not great news. Very few changes have been made since patch 11.05, but those changes have not been kind to the spec. Ancestral Guidance has been removed, and Primordial Wave has been redesigned, requiring Flame Shock to be applied to enemies prior to casting for any measurable damage, and even at that, the damage is not where it was envisioned to be. For Heroic Difficulty Raid, Elemental sits in the bottom third of ranged DPS. For Mythic Plus AoE, the news is a little better where it sits in the top 5, but comes with the additional complexity in the rotation. Given Elemental has historically been a complex spec, and additional complexity that comes with Stormbringer, it takes some mastery of the spec to really get the DPS out of it. For hero talent selection, it's a mix of Farseer recommended for single target and Stormbringer for Mythic Plus AoE content. As far as utility, Elemental continues to have a ton of it, but this only adds to the complexity of the spec with totem management, crowd control, and off-healing when required. Due to the complexity and the lack of single target damage, we're putting Elemental in B tier. For patch 11.1, Affliction Warlock is a single target juggernaut, but not so much for AoE. So for this cycle, it's a pick your content type spec. Even though Affliction saw a little change from patch 11.05 initially, the spec received some pretty hefty buffs to key abilities, such as Unstable Affliction after patch release, which has contributed to its single target rise. In Heroic Difficulty Raid, it sits atop all ranged DPS, just ahead of Devastation Evoker. However, in Mythic Plus AoE, it takes a big drop to the bottom 4. For hero talent selections, Soul Harvester is the predominant choice for single target, and Hellcaller for Mythic Plus AoE, but there appears to be a lot of variation in the opinion on Mythic Plus AoE, so you can find players running either successfully. For solo play, Affliction has great survivability and the Voidwalker tank pet, and although AoE lacks in group content, it is sufficient for open world solo play. As with all Warlocks, Affliction brings on-demand utility with Hellstones, summoning portals, Soulstones, and others, so a raid team without at least one Warlock won't be seen anytime soon. For now, we're putting Affliction in B tier. For Demonology Warlock in patch 11.1, there have not been any major changes outside of a few quality of life updates and improvement to drain life. This has pretty much left it in a similar position to where it was coming into patch 11.05. In Heroic Difficulty Raid and Single Target, it sits square in the middle of ranged DPS, but has climbed further in Mythic Plus AoE, where it resides in the top 3. For solo play, this puts Demonology in a decent position, and high-level delves should not pose too much of an issue given our pets and general survivability. And as a Warlock, we have great self-healing with our Demonic Hellstones and the buffs to drain life. For our hero talent selections, both Soul Harvester and Diabolist are viable in single target encounters, but for Mythic Plus AoE, Diabolist pulls ahead slightly. Even so, you can run Soul Harvester in solo play AoE encounters, such as in Delves, and do just fine. As with all Warlocks, Demonology brings the same on-demand utility and Hellstones, summoning portals, Soulstones, and others, and a couple of useful curses. And survivability is really good, putting it solidly in B tier. Destruction Warlock in patch 11.1 brings some minor changes and updates to the spec talent tree, resulting in some additional options for abilities to be selected as active or passive. This is a great option for players newer to the spec or just looking for a simpler rotation. Talent builds have veered away from Shadowburn back to Channel Demon Fire, making the rotations feel a bit more natural. For hero talent recommendations, as with several specs, we have a mix, with the Obelisk recommended for single target and Hellcaller for Mythic Plus AoE. When it comes to DPS, Destruction has taken a slight step back in patch 11.1. For heroic difficulty raid and single target, Destruction is in the bottom third of Ranged DPS, and it's in the same place for Mythic Plus AoE. This looks to have had some impact on its popularity as well, but it can still be a decent choice in solo play due to access to pets and it being a relatively easy spec to play. From a utility perspective, it's the same as with all Warlocks, and defensively, our survivability is excellent, especially with a 1-minute cooldown Demonic Hellstone. But despite the utility in pets, given the DPS, for now we're going to rank it as a low B tier. Patch 11.1 brings Devastation Evoker's time to shine, and it seems to have benefited the most. Although Devastation itself has seen very little change, it has benefited from the changes to other specs, which has put it in a better position coming into this patch. The rotations and gameplay have not seen any significant change, so for Devastation players, it's a good place to be in. In heroic difficulty raid and single target, Devastation sits only behind Affliction Warlock, and in Mythic Plus AoE, it sits in the top 4 of Ranged DPS. So regardless of content, Devastation is in a good spot right now. Interestingly, this has not catapulted its popularity among Ranged DPS, where it pretty much sits in the middle of the pack. This may be due to the mid-range playstyle, which does make playing Devastation very different from any other ranged spec. Devastation brings with it decent enough group utilities, primarily centered on movement buffs, and many useful crowd control abilities. This, along with Purge and Soothe utility, make it great for solo play as well. However, for solo play, it is important to utilize Devastation's mobility, as it is not a standstill spec if you want to stay alive. Given their damage output in all types of content and their utility, we're putting Devastation in A tier. So there you have it. As always, some winners, some losers, some ranged DPS specs getting their time in the spotlight, while others fall into the shadows. We don't anticipate any major change at this point, but we'll be looking forward to patch 11.1.5 to see if there's any movement from our current standings, and we'll report out on those. As always, let us know your thoughts and any questions you have down below in the comments, and make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you always know what's coming up next. And a special shout out to our members for your continued support. We thank you very much. And everyone, have a great day.